We're now going to do a curves primer. There's two different ways to open curves in Photoshop. One is to go to Image Adjustments and click on Curves. The other way, which I recommend that you use as often as possible, is using the adjustment layer. In the Layers palette, you'll see a little icon there. That's for the adjustment layer. Click on that. Move down to Curves. Click OK. Now you see the Curves dialog box. Now this tool is not that difficult to use. A lot of people have trouble with it simply because they don't understand it. It seems pretty intimidating at first, but we're going to demystify it right now. It works very simply. There's an input and an output and a curve. That's the three main parts. The input is this color ramp from across the bottom here, grayscale ramp actually. It goes from solid black to white, 256 levels. The output goes from black to white at the top. In its neutral position, nothing has changed. Here's an image. This curve here, this maps where the input and the output meet. Seems very confusing. But notice that black, see the point here, at the darkest point in the shadow, black, the input and the output are both 0. That is 0% white, meaning 100% black. Notice that the black here and black there. If we go up to the top here, we'll notice we're sitting at 255. There's 256 levels, I said, but 0 is counted as 1, so the highest point is called 255. So the counting actually starts at 0 instead of 1. But notice that the input is 255, which is completely white. The output is 255, which is completely white. If we go in the middle, we now go to 128, which is 50% gray. The input down here is 50% gray. The output, as we go across to the left, notice that it maps to 50% gray point on this gradient. Same for 25%. Notice 25% here. 25% equals 25% there. That's 25% white I'm talking about. 70% white matches 70% white. 75% white, sorry. So, this curve, what this does is this determines where these two images meet. These two tones, sorry. So, for example, if I was to grab 75% white and click on the curve, notice a point is added. Anywhere you click on this curve, a point will be added to the curve. So the input and the output are exactly the same, so there's no change to the image. Now, if I want to change this area of the image, 75% white, would be around this region here. If I pull this up, I'm going to brighten it. Notice how this region is now brighter in the image. How does that work? Well, we're still 75% on the input, right? See that the shade right there? But on the output, now it's higher. If you go across here, the output is now a much higher. See? It's going almost into the white. If I pull this down, notice we're still in the same range at the input, but the output now is darker. And that affects the image. Notice that that range, the 75% range, is now darker. Very simple. And I can move this point anywhere by dragging it. If I go into the shadow region, and I pull it up, it's going to brighten the shadows. If I pull it down, it's going to darken the shadows. Same with the mid-range. We can brighten the mid-range. We can darken the mid-range. Now, just to illustrate this a little bit more, I forgot to tell you, to remove a point from the curve, just click and drag it outside of the box, and it disappears. Now, when we're inside the image, if we want to sample a region, notice as soon as the mouse moves outside of the dialog box, it turns into an eyedropper tool. I can click anywhere in this eyedropper tool, and in fact, I'll click and drag. Notice the circle is moving on the curve. wherever I move this, it moves a circle. See that? What that circle is telling the curves is this is where the input, let's go to the dark part, that's where the input falls on the curve. If I want to add that point, I will hold down the control or the command key and click. And now that point will be added to the curve. Notice we were around here in the hand, in this area. To brighten this area, we just pull that up a little bit. And notice how it brightens. Of course, the curve moves and affects the rest of the image as well. We can click in the middle somewhere and try and pull that down a little bit and compensate. Try and bring that back to its neutral position. And by doing that, see the curve falls back. Let's pull it right down here. So it's more back in its original position. And now most of the changes are just going to happen in this one region. We can darken that one part, or we can lighten it. Notice though that the curve is working. When I pull this down, see how it pivots on the second point. What we need to do is a thing that we call a lockdown curve. A lockdown curve is when we add a third point. Now by adding this third point, what I'm doing is I'm preventing it pivoting up here. You watch. See how now it's locking a lot of the curve. It's still moving, but not as much. And now my adjustment is just affecting that targeted region. Now, if I want to select more than one point on a curve, I'll hold down the Shift key and I'll click on the point. Notice it changes to black. Black is a selected point. The unfilled is an unselected point. So let's Shift and click. Notice all three of these now are selected. What does that mean? That means that when I click and move, they will move together now as a region. So I'm now moving up and down the curve, and I can move them together. See that? And by doing this, I can create almost my own little graphic equalizer for adjusting the tones on the image. Let's reset this. To reset, hold down the Alt or the Option key, and notice that this button here, the cancel button, will now turn to reset. Click on it, and it resets. Now let me show you these points. I'm going to illustrate by using this grayscale here. We start at white, and I'm going to hold down the Control key and click. Notice there's no point added because there already is a point at 100% white. But now we're just going to go across and click on each one of these regions. And this increments, going up the grayscale ramp. And see these increments there on the curve just to illustrate. Now, let me illustrate how it affects just the one region. If I click on here around the middle, notice you'll see the circle and it's hovering over a point there. Let's grab that point. Notice it's black now, means it's highlighted. Watch this region as I brighten this up. See how that region has been brightened? Of course, I'm overdoing this just to show you. And everything else in the image that falls in that region is brightened. This is almost white now. Now watch as I darken it. I'll pull it down. And notice how that one targeted region is now affected. Okay, we're going to cancel out of here and do something practical with the curves. Let's close this image. Here's an image we're going to work on right now just to show you. Let's open the curves again. Now, if I click with my mouse and I move it, notice how the point is changing. Let's grab this shadow area over here in the wood. Hold the Control key and click. See, a point has been added. Let's brighten that up a little bit and notice the image will brighten based on that one region. Or we can darken it based on that one region. I can drag this outside to get rid of the point. Grab it in the 50% gray. And let's darken it, create a spotlight type effect. Or we can brighten the midtones. So as you can see, curves have a very strong advantage over the other adjustment tools in that we can target a very specific region using curves. There's also some special effects you can do producing curves. If we want to invert an image, for instance, What we do is we just map the black to white. Now we have a completely white image. Not to worry, we grab the white point and we'll change that to black. Notice now that the image is inverted, just like a negative. We can reset that. Posterization. We can use a posterizing filter, or we can posterize in curves. I like to use curves because curves give a lot more control. Let's do that by grabbing this region here, the extreme black, and now we're going to move this along the curve. What are we doing? Is we are mapping this entire region from here to here. We're making that 100% black. We'll do the same thing with the white. Drag that along and notice the effect it's having on the image. As we're decreasing the amount of tones and the amount of colors that are available in the image, we're causing a posterization effect. Remember, we said we could shift and click to select more than one point. Well, another thing we can do is we can use the arrow keys. Use the left arrow key and the right arrow key to move the points. And since they're both the points are selected, both will move together. And now we can find a specific region that we want to posterize. We can go further here and posterize the highlights, or we can go to the right and posterize the shadows. Very handy effect. This is a very trendy type of effect that you see quite often. In using curves, you have a lot more power over it. Another way of using curves, let's reset this. So far we've been adding the points, is to use the pencil tool. Click on the pencil tool, and by doing this, we can now draw our own curve. Release the mouse, and there's our curve. Click back on the original curve tool, and there's the points. We can reset it again. There's a couple of very popular curves. The first one is to increase contrast. It's called an S curve, and we will do that in a separate tutorial. But I'll just show you quickly. Darkening the shadows, lightening the highlights, creates a slight S curve, adds a lot of contrast. To lower the contrast, do the exact opposite. Lighten the shadows, darken the highlights, and we have an image very lacking in contrast. Okay, I hope this has given you a little bit of an understanding of how curves work. We'll be using them a little more specifically in some more tutorials on this video.